So this really may be the end for Russell Westbrook. I know, middle of the offseason, not really much to talk about. However, there has been a little news that has circulated around the NBA community over the past week, and that is former MVP, 9-time All-Star, and future Hall of Famer Russell Westbrook is struggling to find a job in the NBA, which in all honesty really shouldn't surprise anyone. Early this offseason, Westbrook decided to decline his player option to return to Denver and instead test out free agency, with him having a pretty solid season overall. Unfortunately, there's not that many suitors, especially with this new CBA, teams not having that much money, and quite frankly, I think a lot more teams are leaning towards testing out some of their younger players instead of bringing in someone like Westbrook where they know they're going to have to give him major minutes. And because of all those variables, reportedly there's only one team in the league that is willing to give Russ the opportunity that he's looking for, that team being the Sacramento Kings. A quick sidebar, man, what the hell are the Sacramento Kings doing? In the last 7 to 8 months, they went from losing De'Aaron Fox to now their big all-season acquisition is their attempt to bring in Russell Westbrook. Be very mindful that they need to figure out things really quickly, or they're more than likely going to lose Domantas Sabonis for nothing, just like they lost De'Aaron Fox. Like, bro, Sacramento and what they've done over the past 2 to 3 years, going from their first postseason appearance in years to where they are right now, massive steps in the wrong direction in a very short amount of time. Regardless though, back to Russ. See, originally, I wasn't gonna make this video because, in all honesty, it's not breaking news that a 37-year-old point guard can't find a job in the NBA. Like, oh my goodness, teams are not interested in a 37-year-old point guard. Like, regardless of how great Russ is, that's common, that's normal. Him looking at retirement at 37 years old is also common, normal, and it's quite frankly understandable. But what I started to realize is a much bigger problem that many NBA players are facing, especially the great ones. See, back in the day, back when I was growing up watching basketball, a way a player's career would progress would be fairly linear. You get drafted by a team, you stay on a team, and maybe you bounce around a team or two towards the tail end of your career once you're out of your prime. But for the most part, a player would stay on one roster for a good chunk of their careers and basically just stay there until they retired. And normally they would just fall off the face of the map after the age of 32 or 33, and then look at retirement around 34, 35, bada boom, bada bang, you got yourself an all-time great career. Of course, there are outliers here and there where players would play deep into their 30s, looking at 40, but for the most part, a player's career would really taper off pretty quickly once they pass the 30 or 31-year-old mark. And of course, that sucks, but again, it was pretty consistent. However, here we are in today's world where, thanks to the advancement in technology, training, and overall fitness, players have been able to expand their careers to the point where it's pretty consistent for us to see players play beyond the age of 35 years old, which is great. I love to see LeBron, KD, Curry, even Chris Paul play this deep into their careers. However, we all have to also acknowledge that everyone isn't KD, Curry, and LeBron. And because of this, the fall off for some of these players tend to get dragged on so long that people don't necessarily appreciate how long they've been able to play basketball at such a high level that they can still consider themselves NBA players. What people tend to do is they forget how good they were at their absolute best. I've seen this happen pretty consistent with a player like D Wade, where many people just, they have no connection to who Wade was pre-LeBron joining Miami, and so much so where if anybody brings up the fact that Wade at one point in his career was just as good as Kobe, or at least in those conversations, they lose their mind, which is very, very cringeworthy. Possibly an even better example as of late is the dialogue that's surrounding Chris Paul, how when people refer to CP3, they immediately pivot to what he did with the Phoenix Suns, the Houston Rockets, and act as if his time with the Clippers is just a distant memory, and even his time with the Hornets just practically do not exist to a lot of people because how far along it was. Now for me, I associate those players with who they were in the late 2000s and early 2010s because that's the era of basketball I grew up in, and understandably so. Many people who watch this video are probably of the age of 15 to 25, so most of y'all are just not familiar with them, and so that's all understandable. But I'm gonna be honest with you, I cringe pretty mightily when I see people claim that Chris Paul isn't a top 10 point guard, or they start comparing him to the likes of Rajon Rondo because he didn't win a championship. That's very cringeworthy, and I think many people tend to forget how good some of these players were back in the day. But I do believe the player that's going to be by far the biggest victim of this is going to be Russell Westbrook. It surprised me when I was doing my due diligence for this video that if he plays another year in the NBA, playing for another franchise as well, Russell spent just as many years playing without KD than he did with KD, which is really crazy when you stop and think about it, because the Westbrook that I grew up on, how I was introduced to this future Hall of Famer, was someone who was good enough to be the second best player on a team that could consistently make deep postseason runs. 2011 conference finals against the Dallas Mavericks, 2012 NBA finals against the Miami Heat, 2013 Westbrook gets hurt so they don't get past the second round, but bounce back in 2014, making it to the conference finals against the San Antonio Spurs. 2015 KD does get hurt so they missed the playoffs overall, but once KD was back healthy alongside Westbrook, they made it back to the conference finals in 2016. Effectively, anytime KD and Russ were available to finish a postseason run, it resulted in, at bare minimum, the Western Conference Finals, which is extremely impressive, especially at that point in time where the conference was extremely competitive. You had not only a rising Golden State Warriors team, but of course the Los Angeles Clippers, a team that many people tend to forget, again, because Chris Paul is getting older and Blake Griffin, he just retired out of thin air. But those two teams existed, as well as the San Antonio Spurs. The Memphis Grizzlies was also a really, really good team. Like back then, the 2010s Western Conference, great hoops, and OKC consistently found themselves either the best or the second best team in that caliber Western Conference, and Westbrook was the second best player on that team. But unfortunately, many people just don't associate that degree of success when it comes to Russell Westbrook, because they are much more synonymous with the player that he's become from 2017 onwards. And some of that is for good reason. Once KD departed from OKC, that's when Russ went on historic tears statistically, dominated a box score, averaged a triple-double for multiple seasons, and of course, won league MVP. But I do believe Westbrook's inability to translate a lot of those numbers into consistent postseason success is where most people will unfortunately remember his legacy, and not for the player that contributed to a significant amount of success while being the second best player alongside Kevin Durant. It is not because Russ is going to finish his career without a championship, it's how he would normally lose in the postseason. Date it back to 2017, where again, Westbrook was amazing, historic, first player since Oscar Robertson to average a triple-double, which resulted in league MVP at the end of the regular season. However, going into the playoffs, OKC matches up with the Houston Rockets in the first round, a team featuring Westbrook's ex-teammate and James Harden, and there was a lot of noise and narrative surrounding the series, not only between the two guards in the MVP race, as many people, like myself, question the validity of the impact of Westbrook in contrast to Harden that year, but just in a much bigger picture, a lot of people also bring up the fact that potentially OKC picked the wrong guard. They allowed the wrong guard to walk in free agency a few years ago and should have gave Harden the contract and just dealt off Westbrook. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people may lean more on that side of history as time has continued to pass, especially after that series where Houston was able to win in 5 games. Now, to be fair to Russ, many people are graceful when it comes to him in that series, especially because his teammates just weren't adequate, and the points, rebounds, and assist numbers are out of this world. However, the shooting efficiency, decision-making, and inconsistent defensive effort also played a major role in the outcome of that series, especially because some of those games were winnable. Now, in the following season, OKC immediately addressed some of the roster concerns from a talent perspective by providing both Paul George and Carmelo Anthony to Russell Westbrook. But despite these star-studded additions, the Thunder still only added 1 game in their win column and still was knocked out in the first round by a Utah Jazz team that was led by a rookie in Donovan Mitchell offensively, which is really bad. Now, to be fair to Russ in that series, he wasn't the only one who played poorly. Both PG and Melo played egregiously bad. However, more people are probably going to leave that series remembering how Russ baited himself into this back and forth with Ricky Rubio after Rubio had an all-time great game. I think it was like a 35-point triple-double game, and everybody was blaming Russ for his inconsistent defensive effort. Like, it's always been that way, but people just didn't know about this. And so when they saw it right in front of them, Westbrook then vowed that the next game he was going to lock Rubio go up and baited himself to play ultra aggressive defense, which then resulted in him racking up 4 fouls in the first half while still recording a bunch of turnovers and still shooting poorly in that game. Yeah, that was bad. Or maybe even in game 6, despite the fact that I do believe Westbrook played really good in those last 2 games, but in the fourth quarter of game 6, Westbrook effectively shot the Thunder out of the game. He shot like 4 for 14 in a game that was very winnable and could have pushed the series in game 7. So there was that problem. Then you have the following season where the Thunder moved off of Melo due to his unwillingness to accept coming off of the bench, defined the roles between PG and Russ, which made Paul George the first option and then allowed Russ to kind of step back into a more secondary role, which in my opinion is much more natural of him. And even though, yes, his scoring production did take another dip, overall, I do believe that's one of his better seasons. But regardless, though, the outcome was still the same, only adding one more game in the win column and still getting bounced out in the first round. And yes, most people will probably remember that series when Dame waved off PG with that bad shot he took and sent them home on a 50-point bomb. Yes, all that is true. However, let's not also forget that Westbrook once more shot terrible from the field, terrible from behind the arc, turned over the ball a lot, and played terrible off-ball defense on CJ McCollum. All of those things were just as important to them losing that series and anything else that happened in those 5 games. After that, OKC decided to just blow everything up, send PG over to the Clippers and Russ to Houston, where Westbrook, in my opinion, overall had his best body of work post playing with Kevin Durant, playing alongside James Harden, and actually got out of the first round. They did so while Westbrook only played 3 games because he was injured, but still got out the first round for the first time since 2016. Unfortunately, that run was short-lived in 2020 as they got bounced out by the Los Angeles Lakers in the second round, where LeBron was like infamously just leaving him open. So there was that problem. But nevertheless, this definitely felt like this is going to be a right step in the right direction for Russ moving forward. But then unfortunately, Houston blew everything up themselves, sending James Harden over to Brooklyn. And then Russ got shipped over to the Washington Wizards, where he went right back to averaging a triple-double, but still couldn't get past the first round. And many people may have forgotten what Westbrook did in that series against the Philadelphia 76ers. But my goodness, and I mean this so sincerely, I personally believe that series against the Sixers in 21 is the worst playoff series in Westbrook's career. And then from there, it's really, really bad. He spends a year and a half playing for the Lakers, which in my opinion is probably the most damage he's ever done in his career. The spotlight was on consistently playing alongside LeBron in a team that had very real and true championship aspirations. The fit was terrible. He didn't really gel well. They fired a head coach in Frank Vogel, brought in Darvin Ham. He was a bit reluctant to come off the bench, despite the fact that I personally felt like that was the best situation for him on that roster. Refused to do so, eventually accepted the role, but then eventually got shipped off to the Clippers. As soon as he got shipped off to the Clippers, immediately the Lakers went from a team that was struggling to win games, especially early on that year, and immediately shot up in the win-loss column and eventually made it to the conference finals. So there's that. And while all that's happening, the Clippers unfortunately can't make it out the first round as soon as they add Westbrook to their roster, despite the fact that they just made it to the conference finals the first time in franchise history. Now, to be fair, that's not Westbrook's problem. Both Kawhi and PG got hurt before the playoffs even began, so there was that. But still, another first round exit under Westbrook's name. Then the following year, the Clippers add James Harden, which made an awkward fit between Harden and Russ in the backcourt. Westbrook reportedly accepted the bench role, came off the bench for the Clippers, but still resulted in another first round exit. And then finally, he played with the Denver Nuggets last year, where again, I felt as if like his time with Denver, the numbers really weren't there, but I personally believe the effort that he gave and the way he meshed with Jokic by far was the best season I've seen out of him in quite some time, despite again the numbers not being there. But again, the playoff success just wasn't there. The Nuggets bounced out in the second round, and in that series, Westbrook once more was really, really, really bad. And so here we are now heading into year 18, and it seems as if like Westbrook is going to plan to play with Sacramento, and that certainly is not going to result into any significant success that will change the identity of how most people will remember Westbrook. And it's sad to say, but unfortunately, it is true. Most of Westbrook's career at this point will be a player that has struggled to get past the first round, a player that has racked up a bunch of numbers, but most of which have been meaningless. The lack of impact is really hard to deny, and it certainly begs a question of if there weren't better ways for Westbrook to be just a more impactful player besides grabbing a couple of more rebounds or just recording a few more assists. I have said this pretty consistently. Matter of fact, I said it during his MVP season that Westbrook as a player would have done himself a much bigger service if he became a better off-ball player or spent some of that effort when it comes to grabbing rebounds to the defensive side of the floor. And of course, if he just became a bit consistent three-point shooter, all those things would have helped out his game way more than just racking up 10, 10, and 10 in 3 different statistical categories. Like, that's great. Like, the triple-double thing is great. It's amazing. That's something that Westbrook will be stamped and move forward for. But I do believe that Westbrook, unfortunately, will probably go down as a player that most people recognize that box score numbers, points, rebounds, and assists cannot always immediately help you identify one's impact. That there's much more to the game than just box scores. And unfortunately, I feel like that's how most people will remember Westbrook when it's all said and done. Probably will remember him for someone who is one of the least efficient volume scorers in NBA history. Probably remember him as someone who's racked up the second most turnovers in league history despite playing nowhere near as many games as Karl Malone and LeBron James. We'll probably remember him as someone who only made it to the second round twice in the past 8 to 9 years. That's who most people will unfortunately remember Westbrook for, instead of who he was in the beginning stages of his career, which in my opinion is the best version of Russ. The Russ that we saw playing alongside KD, despite him not averaging a triple-double, I believe that version of Russ is actually the best version that we got out of him in his career. And in all honesty, it really does beg the question, is it really all worth it? To be fair, I'm not an NBA player. I'm not going to sit here and tell players what they should do with their careers. But if your legacy is going to be remembered for effectively the second half of your career, the half of the career where, statistically speaking, you have more so attached your name to being Mr. Triple-Double than being the second best player on a title contending team. And I think if that is the case, what does that really say about Westbrook? What does that really say about his legacy, who he is as a player? How will he be remembered? And he's now been in the league for so long that there is a group of fans, a group of viewers who just don't even know who he was playing next to KD. And for some of us who watched that, we may have forgotten who he was at that stage of his career. Regardless though, a very complicated legacy and career for Westbrook. And I feel as if like the longer some of these players stay in the NBA, the more complicated the legacy tends to be. I think Kevin Durant potentially is dealing with that exact same problem. But I think at bare minimum, KD can always live off of this idea that as soon as he touches a roster, many people immediately still believe that they can compete for a championship, which is, a testament to how great he is. Westbrook, in all honesty, has not been that since 2016. But hey, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. What do you think about players staying in the NBA this long and them getting further away from their more impactful years? Also, hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.